Hello, Tech Open Air. My name is Joy Howard, and this panel will be in English, aber es freut mich sehr, heute hier zu sein, denn ich bin ein Berliner. Das war natürlich nur Spaß. Aber im Ernst, während meiner Schulzeit war ich in Hamburg und habe mir immer gewünscht, auch mal in Berlin zu leben. Ich liebe Berlin. I love Berlin. I wish we were there together today. I look so forward to a time when we can all be in person together in Berlin for Tech Open Air. But until then, we are here to talk about digital self-defense. And when I say we, I mean myself, Joy, I'm the CMO of Dashlane, and my colleague, Diva Hurtado, who is a product manager at Dashlane. And the two of us are going to talk to you about digital self-defense. Before we do that, I want to say a little bit about Dashlane for those of you who don't know what Dashlane is. We are a password manager at our core. That's the essence of what we do. But we do more than that. We help people and businesses protect their sensitive data. We are a group of people who are very energized by a vision of what we think the internet can be, which is inspired by our memory of what it used to be. And that is basically fast, open, hyper convenient, and even a little bit wild. We are inspired by our memory of a time when the best things online, like conversations and information, seemed free. And now, of course, the internet is a utility that we live and breathe every day. And it's increasingly a place that's dominated by consolidated corporate interests and a series of hurdles that we don't quite see, and yet seem to increasingly ask us to pay for the convenience of experience of life online with our privacy, our data, and our autonomy. And we wonder why and wish that the internet could be free, especially when it seems more and more like what's actually happening is when we think something is free, we're really actually paying for it with our data and selling our data instead to the highest bidder. It seems often like the daily flood of hacks, breaches, big tech mea culpas, all of them just seem like one more roadblock in our daily journey of life online. And we don't think it has to be this way. We believe that companies like us and people like you can take steps to regain our digital independence. And that's what we're going to do in this session by building the muscle of digital self-defense. So the internet, as I just described, is of course not perfect. Different people have different worries online. Businesses want to protect their customer data, and they also worry about how employees' cyber habits will affect their data and their customers. Parents are having to think about how to protect their kids online. Journalists have to worry about doxing. And women and underrepresented groups have to worry about harassment and trolling. It seems often, and actually it is increasingly the case now, that our work and personal lives are more connected than ever online. Many of us are dealing with extended work hours online, which can be very exhausting. So we're working longer and longer hours, all of that online. We are sharing physical devices, accounts, and hardware, often with each other at home. And that overlap between our work lives and our personal lives can put both us and our companies at risk. Data breaches cost millions of dollars every year. And believe it or not, and I actually did not know this at all before I came to work at Dashlane, the #1 cause of breaches are weak, reused, and stolen passwords. So we're going to talk about that, but digital self-defense is about more than passwords. We think a lot about how companies and employees can work together to take their digital health seriously, and we're going to cover the many ways in which we think you can do that today. It's important to do it today because in this time, especially during the pandemic, unfortunately, many people are more vulnerable as a result of the pandemic than they ever have been before. And unfortunately, bad actors are increasingly capitalizing on that vulnerability online. During the era of COVID-19, cyber attacks are on the rise, even targeting industries and individuals who are working to address the outbreak. Hackers and cyber criminals, unfortunately, see an opportunity and they take it. Next slide. How is this happening? How are these things happening? Well, as many of you know, big tech collects and sells your data. Unfortunately, also, as I've described, bad actors are committing things like breaches, phishing, scams. They're attempting sextortion, doxing, trolling, identity theft. When it comes to data, the fine print allows companies to use data in ways that you probably either don't understand, or even if you did understand, you probably wouldn't want. But the thing is that even though all these terrible things are happening, oftentimes I think we are left feeling vulnerable, and even worse, that it's somehow our fault or our responsibility to solve it. And of course, it's not our fault that we don't know what to do about this stuff. And it's also not necessarily in companies' best interest to help you. But that's why we're here today. We want to shine a light, next slide, on the dark corners of the web, so you can better protect your family, your family's data, and the data of your business. Next slide. Cybersecurity, it is not just jargon. It is a word that sounds very daunting often, or maybe even not interesting to many people. Although because of all the things that I've just talked to you about that are happening increasingly, and because our lives have moved more and more online, it is, of course, much more important than it's ever been before. But I think the fact that it sounds so cold and robotic often puts people off from learning about it or doing anything about it. In fact, cybersecurity is very human, because guess who uses the internet? We do, and we're humans. So this session, we are going to cover the three main areas of digital self-defense. You do not need to worry about taking notes. We're going to cover a lot of information. It's all going to be useful, and you're going to want to know about it later, but you don't need to worry about writing it all down, because after the session, we're going to share a handbook with all of the information that we're going to cover in the session. So what are we going to cover? Let's look at the three main areas that we're going to cover. The first thing that we're going to do is we are going to get your data out of the corners of the internet where it doesn't belong. The second, your personal information. The second is we're going to have a look at where your data is actually going and make sure that you're comfortable with where it's going, and fix that if you're not. And the third thing that we're going to do, obviously, is the thing that we're really best at, and that is securing your passwords. So I'm going to now turn it over to Diva, and she is going to take you through steps 1, 2, and 3, and then I'll be back at the end to tell you what it all means. So Diva, take it away.
So thank you so much, Joy, for kicking that off. As mentioned, my name is Diva Hurtado, and I'm a product manager at Dashlane. So I initially felt compelled to join this self-defense project in response to sort of the vulnerability that I personally felt online, not just as a regular internet user, but also as a woman online. As mentioned, there's plenty of attacks that happen on women, harassment. So for this reason, I felt like this session is great, because it really walks you through how to take ownership of yourself and your identity online. And I'm happy to share some of those tips that I learned along the way. So first things first, let's discuss getting your private information off the web. So I want to start with a question. Have you ever Googled yourself? I'm sure you have, and I know that I have. And I was pretty embarrassed by some of the things that came up. It was a lot of things from my mom, basically posting videos of me and me as a kid. And so I basically had to contact my mom and ask her to take the videos down. So I guess I essentially practiced the right to erasure with my mom, which I'll get into GDPR rights later. But basically, I'm sure that you've done the same thing, and you might have been surprised of what came up. So unfortunately, there's a lot of data that's out there about you. So some of the things that you can search, such as your name, your social media accounts, your photos, your addresses, all of these things are available online. But there's also information about you that is not necessarily as searchable, such as some of the data that some of the companies might have about you. So they know things like your search history, your most visited websites, online purchases, and in some cases even genetic data. So, and this can have some weird consequences. So for example, I'm sure that you've noticed at times that you can get some internet ads that are a little creepy, a little bit too specific, a little bit too tailored to the conversation you just had with your friend. So the thing is, this all comes down to the data that you're using on your browser and you're searching for, and your browser, such as Google, for example, might be some of the cause for that. So there's a variety of places where this might come from. So it's not just one thing that is to blame. So for example, you might have agreed to an app's terms and service without really reading the fine print. I know that we've all done this. Or maybe there was some website cookie notifications that you just sort of clicked on and ignored. Those could also be to blame. And it's more often than not the companies that you trust, unfortunately. So your browsers that you use every day are collecting information piece by piece until they have a perfect picture of who you are. So this can all feel pretty overwhelming. As mentioned, for me, it was definitely an overwhelming feeling to feel like different pieces of me were spread all over the internet in different places. But there are things that you can do. So one thing that you can do is look into your browser settings to better protect your privacy and check for things like auto deletion. There are different special settings that exist. Not all of them are always out in the open for you, but make sure that you check your browser settings and see if there's anything that you can do to better secure yourself. Or you can switch search engines altogether. So there's search engines like DuckDuckGo that doesn't necessarily track your information. So they're a great privacy alternative to search engines than something such as Google. So the last thing that you can do to sort of limit your data spread is a little bit more about a mentality. So you can learn some healthy skepticism. And while it might be against your nature to, you might need to train yourself to not just click things to make them go away. Because most often than not, that's what most businesses are expecting you to do. So when you're signing up for apps and services, just make sure that you're actually trying to read through some of the fine print and seeing what information that they're asking for you and that you're agreeing to give. So another important thing is to know your GDPR rights and responsibilities. There's more specific tips and tricks on this in the handbook, but let's cover some GDPR basics here. So there are 7 main GDPR rights. There is the right to be informed, there's the right to access, rectification, erasure, restricting processing, and data portability and object. I know that as an American, I didn't even realize all of these possibilities existed to have control over, and it's really nice that they're all sort of packaged here in the GDPR rights and compliances, but they do have implications for you as a business and an individual. So the one that I will be covering today, which has maybe the most actionable points that you would need to know today, is the right to erasure. So this one's important because it gives you the right to ask organizations to delete any and all of your personal data. So in order to do this, you need to make a verbal or written request to that organization that you'd like to delete your data. And according to the law, the organization is legally required to respond within a month. And if this doesn't happen, the individual that made the request is able to actually create a complaint to the National Data Protection Authority. So this is important for businesses and individuals alike. For businesses, for example, it's important to know your GDPR rights and responsibilities because it's important to secure your business, to protect your customers' data and retain your customers' trust, but also possibly avoid some costly fines that could exist if you are not compliant with these rules. So again, there's more information for people and businesses found in the handbook. So the second thing that we're going to look at today is your social media and why you should care about how much personal data big tech has access to. So basically, why is it important to keep your information private online? So let's take a minute to look at these companies and think of the different accounts you might have for these various companies. So how much data do you actually think that they have access to? So something to keep in mind is that if you're not paying for a product, you are the product. Why would you think that a company would offer a free service that is so extensive, has all of these capabilities? It doesn't make sense from a financial standpoint why a company would offer that for free. And so in the end, it's really not free, and there is a cost that maybe isn't monetized in money for you, but there is a cost to you as your entity online. So here is some of the information that Facebook alone collects. So name, every messages that you've ever sent, contacts on your phone, every time you log in, device you logged in, ads. I mean, it's really endless here. It's basically anything that you're doing on these platforms is being monetized and used and watched. So why should you care? Because it's more than just creepy. Your data can actually be misused. So companies are collecting this data and they're making profit off of selling it. So your data can be used for micro-targeting, for example, which is a marketing strategy that uses people's information and demographic data to segment them into small groups. And because of the amount of data available, micro-targeting can also be used, unfortunately, to discriminate sometimes. But it's not just the large companies, it's also individuals that are watching as well. If you're in the market for a job, for example, keep in mind that 70% of employers have admitted to using social media to vet candidates. So there are some things that you can do to limit that information from big tech that they have access to, particularly when it comes to social media. So this is where things are going to get a little bit more interactive. So if you want to follow along with me and you have an Instagram account, go ahead and take out your phone. So I'll just give us a moment if you want to get your phone and open. So maybe some of you are already on Instagram right now. We can't see anybody's, this is not an interactive webinar, so you might already be on Instagram. But either way, if you want to just open up, there's some step-by-step instructions we're going to go through to limit some of that activity from Instagram, sorry. So we have a checklist about limiting data loopholes, protecting privacy, and increasing your security game. And we're going to start here with limiting data loopholes. So if you are on your Instagram page, if you click the hamburger menu and go to settings, and then go to security, apps and websites, there you'll see a list of companies that might have already been granted permission by you to look into your data and use your data on Instagram. So if you do see anything unexpected in there, you might want to open that and remove access from these companies. So we've all been there. We've checked boxes, we gave permission without really thinking about it, just to get to the thing that we wanted to do, and then we just sort of forget about it. And the thing is, all these apps and websites keep that permission until we take it back. So it's easy to revoke these privileges more often than not, and sometimes they're just buried in your settings. So yeah, I'm wondering if anyone was surprised by what they saw. Feel free to chat and discuss anything that you guys see. It might be interesting to see if you guys had anything surprising in there. So while everyone is kind of going through that, I'm going to go to the second item, which is about your privacy and putting your accounts on private. So besides limiting app permissions, another way to keep your images off Google or other search engines is to make sure that your account is on private. So finally, the third item on this checklist is to turn on two-factor authentication. So two-factor authentication, or 2FA, is an additional security layer for your accounts. So basically, if you log in, it would need confirmation from another email device of some sort to confirm that that login is real. So this is a really good security tool because it limits and prevents you from having unauthorized logins. If someone were to unfortunately get your password of some sort, 2FA would basically prevent that from going any further. So the third thing that we're going to cover here is passwords. So let's talk about passwords. So why are passwords important? It might seem obvious why passwords are important, but let's try to think of this as an analogy. So imagine that a password was a physical key. So imagine that key was the same key that you used for your room, your parents' house, your office. So if you could imagine, losing that key would be pretty dangerous, and it would be a big concern because it leaves these 3 rooms vulnerable. So it's a bit like that with passwords. So if you have your password at risk in one account, it puts all of these other puts your other accounts at risk, because there's algorithms that are systematically trying to get into all these different systems with the passwords that are breached. So for this reason, we always suggest having a unique and strong password for all of your accounts in order to reduce your chance of being hacked. So it's essentially having a separate key for each of the doors. But besides your own account being at risk, you can also be putting your companies at risk. So Joy mentioned this, but there's more often than not, 80% of company breaches are because of weak, reused, and stolen employee credentials, which is pretty shocking. So as a business, it's also important to acknowledge the importance of passwords for you and your employees. So let's take a moment to think about how many accounts you might have. You can put your guesses in the chat if you like. Maybe you think it's 10, maybe 20, but you're wrong. We find actually in our studies, it's more often than not closer to 200. So it's interesting when we do user tests, people actually normally believe that they have around 20, but it's pretty off. Like people have a lot more accounts than they think. So now try to think of how you're storing that. So try to think of storing 200 strong and unique passwords. Maybe you're using phone notes, maybe you're using Post-its or system defaults like Apple Keychain. None of these are necessarily horrible, but they're not at all the most secure way to store your passwords by any means. So this is where a password manager like Dashlane comes in. So with Dashlane, you can securely store and autofill your password, payment, and information. I know that before I came across password managers, I was basically in the cycle of just having the wrong password, changing my password, and I would do this every single time, just assuming I would never remember my passwords. And I sort of got used to the horrible user experience of doing that. But there is an alternative to this. You can have all of your passwords in one place. And if you're using Dashlane at work, for example, it's easy to keep personal and work accounts separate, which can be pretty critical for the privacy of your company. So sharing passwords also with your teammates is easier and much more secure than doing it over Slack or email, which I'm sure we're all guilty of, but not at Dashlane. So we can improve. So we've talked a lot about keeping yourself safe during this webinar, but you might want to know, how do you actually know what you're doing is helping? So Dashlane offers you that perspective with a feature called Password Health. So this basically gives you a breakdown of your passwords that are weak, reused, or compromised. And for admins that use Dashlane at work, this can help you improve your employees' score and track it over time. And as part of this digital self-defense class, we actually want to offer everyone 6 months of Dashlane. So that code will be in the handbook, but the code is TOA 6. So if you want to go ahead and use that, it will unlock 6 months of Dashlane for free for everyone that's attending today. So before we get into more of the benefits of Dashlane and password management, you might be wondering, is it really a good idea to put all my eggs in one basket? What if Dashlane gets hacked, basically? So this all comes down to something called zero-knowledge architecture. So it has to do with encryption. And this is also why password managers are the most secure solution. So every time you store something in Dashlane, it's encrypted using your master password as a key. And so a master password is the password that you create to secure all your other passwords. So your Dashlane account can only be unlocked with your master password, and only one person knows it, and that person is you. So without it, your data remains completely indecipherable. It means that even in the unlikely event that Dashlane were to be hacked, which has never happened so far, everything in your account will be securely encrypted. So if you think about it, it could be like a safety deposit box. So if you were to break into a bank, which I hope none of you are planning on doing anytime soon, you could go into the bank, but if you found a safety deposit box, you still would not be able to get into that without having a specific key to get into that additional lock. So we've talked a lot today about keeping your data out of places where it doesn't belong, places like the dark web. So what is the dark web? So the dark web is a lot of things, but in short, it's a thing that is used for illegal activity, but basically anything. They sell everything, which obviously leads way to illegal activity, but the dark web doesn't necessarily have to be inherently bad. It's the internet just like ours, but it requires a specific software to access it. And for this reason, it's not indexed by things like search engines like Google, so it doesn't show up in search results. So it would be impossible to monitor whether or not your information is on the dark web. So this is why Dashlane offers this feature to make sure that we're keeping track of whether or not your data is being found on the dark web or not. So here's how it works. Dashlane basically scans the dark web to see if any of your accounts have been breached or if any of your emails have been found in a breach. And if your dark web monitoring flags any of your accounts, we recommend that you start by putting those accounts into Dashlane. And if they aren't already there, then going into each site and updating your password with a secure Dashlane generated alternative. So the reason for this is that oftentimes when there is a mass hack of a platform, hackers actually take those passwords and just bulk put them in the dark web. So they don't necessarily utilize each of these passwords themselves as hackers, because imagine they're breaking into tons of accounts. They're actually just monetizing the selling of these passwords. So this is what Dashlane is helping keep track of. So that's going to be all from me. Joy, do you want to close us out here?
I would love to. If you go to the next slide, I would like for everyone to know that basically we have covered a lot of data today. We covered a lot of information today. And if you are like I was before I started working in this space, you probably weren't aware of how the dark web worked, of how weak, reused, and stolen passwords find themselves on the dark web, how they're actually used to create data breaches. And if any of you heard about the Robinhood breach that happened recently, it actually happened in exactly this way. So it basically happened by hackers finding, customers' passwords on the dark web and then using it to hack their accounts and actually get to their funds. I actually myself, didn't really start working on this stuff until really recently. I did it mostly just to, have a more convenient way to log in and kind of navigate my life online. I will tell you, in the same way that Diva Googled herself and found videos of herself online that she didn't know were there, I have also recently been the victim of identity theft, which is the sort of thing that you kind of hear about all the time and you actually think will never happen. And it happened to me, and fortunately I was protected, obviously, because I have this product. But the part of it that I didn't actually expect was just how incredibly time consuming it was to remediate that. Even if you have a service that protects you, you still yourself have to close down every account that's been created. You have to prove that it's you. And obviously right now, with everything that's going on with the credit card companies and all these other kind of, utility companies where your identity's stolen, they're just deluged with people calling them, and it's really, really hard to get through. So it actually had to take several days off work to deal with it, and it was a huge pain in the butt. And one of the reasons to kind of, take the time to sort of get your digital house in order is obviously so that you never have to go through something like I did and spend a lot of time trying to sort it out. But also because people tend to underestimate just how much time they waste all the time not really solving these problems just once and for all. So before the pandemic, people had less accounts that they did than they do now. And before the pandemic, we found that that people can save about people waste about 55 hours a year in trying to retrieve and reset their password. So it's just a total pain that we think you should avoid. And I think if we could give you back 55 hours before the pandemic, then we could probably give you back more now. And there's nothing really, really more precious than your time. And you're entitled to do the best things that you possibly can with your time, and a couple other rights that you have that we want to remind you of that are really important when it comes to digital self-defense. And the first one is to remember that everyone deserves to own their own data. That's the first thing. And the second thing is that you have more power than you think about your life online. And probably the third thing is it's not as hard and overwhelming as you think it is to exercise that power. So that is the end of our course, and we're now going to open up for question and answer, I believe. If anybody has any questions or answers, I would welcome them now. And for those of you who joined late, just a reminder that you're going to get this digital self-defense handbook after the session. So if you came late and you missed the beginning, don't sweat it. Or if there's anything that you think maybe blew by and you didn't catch it, we're going to send you this handbook, and you'll have all the information that we covered in the session to use at your leisure. So with that, questions?
Yes, thank you, Joy and Diva. And we have somebody who has a burning question since the start of this session. So I am presenting to you Thomas Anderson.
Hey, Thomas. We lost him. What was his question?
I'm actually not sure.
I would love to know.
He put a question really early, so maybe it was just done in error.
All right, so next on the list is Martin Schönherr.
And also you can write your questions in the chat as well, and we'll attend to them as well if this moderator panel is not working.
Shoot, I'm clicking on him, but I can't see him.
Yeah, it's not working for me either.
Hey, Nico. Well, I don't know if we're going to be able to take questions.
That's too bad.
I know. Let's wait a minute and see if we can figure this out.
Okay. Yeah, I'm not sure if it's working, but we'll take any questions in the chat because it seems that as if the moderation option is not working. So.
Well, if we don't have any questions, I think we give it another minute and then we might just wrap it up.
Sure.
Thanks again to everyone for coming and paying attention. And you can always reach Diva and myself on LinkedIn. So if you want to reach out to us directly with questions on LinkedIn, feel free to do that. Otherwise, download your handbook in the chat. And thank you so much for joining. And we wish you all the best for a safer and happier life online. Thanks.
Thanks. Bye.